morning at Isaiah chapter 9. So if you have a Bible, then you might want to go there. I think we're not able to get it on the screen this morning. We did attempt, but the computer's being a bit troublesome, isn't it? So we're at Isaiah chapter 9. It's page 694. So if you're in the Beacon Bible, Jeff is handing them out. So if you need one, just put up a hand. But it's page 694 in the Beacon Bible. Now, I just wonder, how many of you are really, really good at waiting for things? Anybody really, do you love waiting? Anybody super good at being patient? Whenever I think about patience, I think of two things. One, I think growing up as a teenager, my mom, I don't know why, because when you're a kid, you don't ask your parents as adults why they do, but as an adult, but always in my mom's bathroom, maybe because that's where she did her hair and makeup in the morning or something. There was this little thing, and there was a little kid who was praying on his knees and said, "God, please grant me patience, but I want it now." So I always used to use my mom's bathroom for the shower, and I'd see that every morning. The other one, I worked in medical publishing for 5 years, and there was one of the editors who would work with the authors. I worked in the after the fact production, but this guy worked with and in his cubicle he had this, and it was a picture of an editor on its knees with his hands like this saying, "Please," but it was a skeleton because they'd been waiting for manuscript for so long. So that's what I think of. But waiting, maybe lots of us aren't good at waiting. I'm not very good at waiting. I get very excited. I'm terrible with surprises because I get so excited about them. I want to tell you my surprise. Well, I'm not good with secrets. But Advent, this is the first week of Advent, so the 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas. And so it's appropriate then. Advent is about waiting. It's about waiting. Now we might think of Advent and waiting as sort of waiting for Christmas, right? That excitement feeling. For me, it's quite exciting because I'm 10 days away from going home to see my family, which I haven't done in a couple of years, right? But that's an excited waiting, isn't it? Hopefully, and maybe not everyone, but there is some joy, hopefully, around Christmas. Or maybe we think about waiting around Christmas and we think about waiting for a baby because they waited, like Mary waiting for baby Jesus to be born. And so maybe we think about that sort of hopeful, maybe nervous, but mostly excited waiting. I can remember when Sheila was waiting for her little grandbabies to be born, and she'd talk about, "Oh, they're coming soon," There's that excited waiting. But I actually think that Advent is a different kind of waiting. You see, waiting for Christmas or waiting for a baby, it sort of has an end date, doesn't it? We know, I know Christmas is December 25th, and unless the world stops turning, it's just going to come. I can mark off the days on the calendar if I want to, right? If you're waiting for a baby, there could be some anxiety there, depending on and it could come early, but it's not going to be 2 years, there is a finite window of time that you're going to be waiting. But there's other kinds of waiting that I think are a little bit more difficult. If you think about the soldier who's out on a deployment and the family who's waiting for that soldier to come home, it's quite poignant at this time in our world, isn't it? Thinking about people all fighting a war and a family waiting, and maybe you don't know exactly when they're going to come home, and maybe there's a lot of anxiety of will they come home or what will happen in the meantime. That's a hard kind of waiting, isn't it? Without a lot of clarity. Or maybe single people, waiting to get married. You don't know when. Maybe you're hopeful. Maybe you want that to happen, but they don't know when. Or maybe somebody waiting for a cure. Maybe they have a serious illness. We kind of understand this kind of waiting. It's a different kind of waiting, isn't it? It's not a waiting that says there's a definite, this is when this problem is resolved. This is when you're going to reach the end. In fact, sometimes there doesn't feel like there is a guarantee. It just feels like maybe you have hope. Maybe you have faith. Or maybe it's quite hard to hang on to faith and hope in that kind of a waiting. But it's a much more challenging waiting. But I think, even though it's a bit of a downer perhaps, I think it's actually more accurate to what we're talking about when we talk about waiting during Advent. I think it's that harder, more difficult waiting that actually is much more realistic. Waiting to get a gift on Christmas Day sounds nice, but that's not what life is like most of the time, is it? That's why we get so excited about it, because it's like, oh, something, a little bit out of the ordinary. It's the harder kind of waiting that we're used to. It's the harder kind of waiting that we experience, I think, more regularly. And I think it's the kind of waiting that the Bible talks about. So we're going to look at Isaiah chapter 9 for a couple of minutes, but before we do, it's important that you have a little bit of context. I'm not going to read all of this, but just to sort of root it in a history, in a space. In Isaiah chapter 7, the nation of Israel by this point has been divided. They've been broken by war and empire, and so they're split into two different kingdoms. And so we've just got one kingdom here, and it's ruled by a king called Ahaz, King Ahaz. And in chapter 7, God comes to King Ahaz and gives him an instruction and says, I want you to do this. And literally it says, like, the very next answer from King Ahaz is, no. Literally, just, no, I'm not going to do that. Absolute, defiant, disobedient, rebellion against God. I'm not going to do what you want me to do. And so, because of that, God says that he's going to bring judgment because of his sin. There's going to be a penalty. There's consequences for being disobedient. That's what we teach kids, don't we? There's consequences for disobedience. And so God says the same to King Ahaz. He's leading the nation of Israel, and they're being disobedient. And so God says there's going to be judgment, and this judgment comes in the form of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians were the powerful empire of the time, and they come and they attack from the north. And the northern areas of the kingdom at that time were areas called Zebulun and Naphtali. Well, that's how I'm pronouncing them anyway, so we'll go with that and pretend it's right, yeah? These are the areas, and as the Assyrians came in, they plunge and ravage and destroy, particularly these two areas. And this whole nation then, this whole partial kingdom of Israel is subjugated, is absolutely defeated and destroyed, and then brought under the rule of the Assyrian Empire. And it's cruel and it's harsh, and they've just been, the nation of Israel by this point has been entirely decimated. They're plunged into darkness and despair. And it is into that Isaiah speaks to the people in Isaiah chapter 9. It's important to have that rooted in. What's their experience when God speaks to them? So let's look at Isaiah chapter 9. We're just going to read the first 7 verses. Isaiah chapter 9, the first 7 verses. This is what Isaiah says to the people that God is speaking to them. He says, nevertheless, despite all that's gone on, despite all your disobedience and war and despair and destruction, nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the future he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning. It will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given. And the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. It's a powerful promise, isn't it? Spoken to a group of people who are in despair, who've been absolutely destroyed, a little bit because of their own choices and actions. And yet God has compassion in the midst of their sadness, in the midst of their destruction, recognizing despite the fact that they've been ravaged by the consequences of their own sin, God comes and says, I'm going to rescue you. And do you notice, I purposely pointed it out because we could have just skipped to verse 2, right? Like we could have just started there, that's the bit we're familiar with. But I think it's important to notice in verse 1, do you notice those two areas that I said I could pronounce, right? Zebulun and Naphtali. God names them by name. Those most destroyed, those most ravaged, absolutely decimated. And he calls them out by name and says, I'm going to start here. My rescue is going to come to the most desperate, to the most destroyed. There's something powerful. And the promise that he gives, in verse 2, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. There's this promise that there's hope. That yes, you've been living in darkness. Yes, you've been living in despair. Yes, you've been destroyed by your own sinfulness. But God promises a rescue. And in verse 4, he tells us how. Do you notice that? In verse 4, he says, as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them. Now, maybe, if you're like me, don't worry, it's not just you. Even the pastor's like, well, what's Midian's defeat? So I went and looked up and thought, oh, I should know this. If you're quite spiritual, maybe you knew it and I didn't. It's Gideon. Do you remember Gideon? Does anybody remember Gideon in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the story? Do you remember what happened with Gideon? He had a big army. Do you remember that? And he's going to go to battle. And God says, you have too many people. It's not often that you think, I've got too many people to fight this battle. But God says, you have too many. And so he gives them these series of tests. I don't remember all the tests, but I remember one of them is they had to go and they had to drink water. And if they put their weapon down or if they scooped or it was like he gave multiple tests. And whatever soldiers did the thing the way that God wanted them to do it, and they didn't know the way, he just said, send them down and see how they drink the water, right? This was a bit like, right? And in the end, after these series of tests, do you remember how many men were left to fight? 900? I thought it was 300.
You might be right. I only guessed.
Oh, yeah. I'm like, I'm convinced, Jeff. You've convinced me. I think it was 300. Ian will tell me if I'm wrong. I think. I think it was 300. However many it was, a few hundred men is not enough to fight a war against a whole nation. Now, why did God do that? Why did God do that? Because we know Gideon wins the war. So what was the point? What's the point he's trying to make? It's that we're not winning the war, right? That God's telling the nation of Israel, you're not going to win this war. It's not your power. It's not your might. He says that, doesn't he? Not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord Almighty. God says, I'm going to make your army so small that you will never have a doubt that it was me who gave you the victory. If you were really strong and really powerful, you might be tempted to think you were the one who did it. But if your army's too small and everybody looks around you and says that's an impossible battle to win, then you'll know only God does impossible things. And so he reminds them of this and says, in the day of your darkest moment, when you've been absolutely ravaged and destroyed by sin, I'm going to send you a rescue. And I'm going to send you a rescue in the same way that I rescued you when Gideon was leading you. I'm going to rescue you in a way that only God can do. So you could not take credit. So you cannot ever be tempted to think, oh, I did this myself. Because that's our temptation, isn't it? We're quite can-do, stiff upper lip. I say we, I'm identifying, right? I can do this, I'm all right, I'm tough. I'll get through, we'll grind it out. And God says, none of that. I'm going to rescue you, but I'm going to do it in a way that leaves no doubt in your mind. You could never do this. It's impossible for you. It's not impossible for me. And what he promises then is something quite powerful. In verse 5, and it feels a bit emotional to me if I'm honest, if we think about what the world is right now. Because in verse 5, he says, every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. People have been destroyed by war. He says, and all of the trappings of war, that's what he's describing here. He says, they're going to be abolished. I'm going to rescue you from the ravages and the destruction of war. of the pain of death and violence. We can understand that right now, can't we, in a small way? I feel like you can't look at the television without just being traumatized by what's happening. People in our church have got literally refugees fleeing, looking for somewhere safe for their children and their families to go. We're looking at the news and seeing people who are prisoners of war and hostages and violent this and death that. And we're living in darkness, aren't we? And yet the promise of Advent is to the people living in darkness, there will be a great light. He also then goes on, he doesn't say just that there's going to be an end to the war and the violence and the pain that comes with that, but then he goes on in verses 6 and 7 and he describes that a child is going to come. And he describes it in a particular way. First he says, to us a child is born, to us a son is given. Well, human children are born, aren't they? He's making the statement that he wants us to understand, to know with absolute certainty that the rescuer who would come would be fully human, born of a woman, comes into the world just like you and me. However, not only a human, because he will be called, and then he uses these series of words. Wonderful Counselor. The word wonderful there actually is a reference to divinity in the Hebrew. It's not wonderful like, oh, that's wonderful. It's the most wonderful time of the year. It's not. It's wonderful, like awe-inspiring. It's a divine word used for my mind cannot contain how amazing this being, this God actually is. Wonderful Counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father. That's one who lives in eternity, not confined by time and history like human beings. Prince of Peace. These are all divine language. So he's telling us that a rescuer is going to come into your darkest moment. He's going to provide rescue, and he's going to do it in a way that only God could do it. And this one who rescues will be fully human, born into the world, just like you and me. However, they won't just be a person like anyone else. They are going to be the evidence, the presence of the divine in our worlds. It's a powerful statement. Can you imagine, going to a nation right now, and there are a few, I could think of 6, going to a nation right now plunged into war and desperation, in fear for their lives, and telling them, rescue is coming. What great hope that would bring. However, it's not, rescue is coming on December 25th, don't worry, you just need to count down the days. It's not that kind of waiting, is it? Isaiah gave them this promise, and the nation of Israel would wait for hundreds of years. Generations of families would need to wait and hope. There's 2 kinds of promises that they're given here, and I think these promises are still for us today. I think we're still a people who know what it's like to live in darkness. And some of us live in the darkness of the world that's around us, what we see happening and how it affects us. And some of us live in the darkness and the reality of our own space, of our own lives. We live in the darkness of families that feel broken. We live in the darkness of diseases that don't have cures. We live in the darkness of perhaps the consequences of our own wrong choices that are destructive to our lives. And into that darkness, God still gives promises. He gave specific promises here in Isaiah to the nation of Israel, but he still gives promises to us. There's 2 kinds of promises. I'll just give them to you quite quickly. The first promise is that to the people living in darkness, they've seen a great light. A child is born, a son is given. The first promise is the promise of Jesus. And you might think that's what Advent is all about. It's just all about remembering. But Jesus already came. If Advent was only about waiting for baby Jesus to be born, it would no longer be called waiting for us. You don't need to wait for something that happened 2,000 years ago. You just need to believe it. But for some, perhaps you're still waiting because perhaps you haven't yet taken advantage of the promise. You're still bumbling along in the darkness, and God says, I've given you an opportunity to walk in the light. Right? I love that song, Johnny. I do. We should have just, right? I just want to speak the name of Jesus. There's power in that name. It's transformative. It's healing. I always get a bit choked up when we sing about the bit about praying the name of Jesus over our families, because lots of my family, including my brother, doesn't trust in Jesus. And I just pray. He's still walking in the darkness in some ways. And I pray for him. And for anyone in my family, my friends, I've seen all sorts of friends over the weekend doing the panto. And I'm praying for them because they're still in the season of waiting to discover that there is hope to be found in Jesus. But there's a second promise. Did you notice it there? I didn't actually finish reading the whole thing. We read verse 6. To us a child is born, to us a son is given, and we described the names that let us know that Jesus wouldn't just be a human being, just a good person. Yeah, just so you know, Jesus was not good. C.S. Lewis makes this argument. Jesus was not good. If you have a friend who's not a Christian, and they say, no, Jesus, he was a good guy. He was a moral teacher. He wasn't. He couldn't be, because he claimed to be God. So if I stood up here and said, I'm God, I can save you, you wouldn't say, oh, she's such a nice person. You'd probably be phoning, Sue, I think you need to check on Chrissy. You'd either think I was mad, or you'd think, actually, she knows what she's doing, and she's just lying to people so that she can get something from them. Think of the number of people who have died believing that Jesus was the Son of God. If he's a liar, then he's a terrible person. He's not a good person who said nice things. Or Jesus is everything that he said that he was. Liar, lunatic, and Lord. That's what C.S. Lewis says. Either Jesus is a lunatic, or he's a liar, or he is, in fact, the Lord. He is, in fact, God himself come to rescue people. Those are the only options. We don't get to think that Jesus was a nice person, but he's not really God and we don't need to listen. And lots of people, we feel uncomfortable saying Jesus was a bad person because he did so many good things. He gave so many wise teachings. So if we're uncomfortable with Jesus, with calling Jesus a lunatic or a liar, then perhaps we need to wrestle with why we don't want to acknowledge that he is, in fact, the Lord. That's what Isaiah comes to tell us, that we have been offered rescue. We're not waiting for that anymore. In Israel, they were waiting for their rescue, and they waited for, from the end of the New Testament, Malachi is the last book of the New Testament, they waited for 400 years without a single word. But Isaiah was written hundreds of years before that. Hundreds of years, generations of families waiting for rescue that we now have freely available and open to us. But the second promise that was given to them was not Jesus as a baby, but Jesus as a king. Look at the promise in verse 7. It talks about his government. That's his rule, his reign. It says, of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. You see, the second part of that promise is that war won't be any longer, that Jesus will reign as king, that there will be peace, that there will be justice in the world, and that everyone will do what is right. Are we still waiting for that? We're still waiting for that, aren't we? The world is still broken, isn't it? We haven't actually received that. So Advent for us is still about waiting, but it's not about waiting for baby Jesus and Christmas presents on December 25th. Jesus wasn't even born in December, right? It's just when we remember him. It's not about waiting for baby Jesus if you're a Christian. If you're not a Christian, then it is perhaps, that's the bit where you're at. But if you're a Christian already, This is about waiting for King Jesus to return. He's made a promise that even though we're living in a world that looks dark, even though our circumstances surrounding us appear like those that might fill us with despair, when the days are difficult, when we get a diagnosis that is heartbreaking, when we turn on the news and see what's happening around the world, when we feel bereft and unable to reach out to the people that we love and know, gosh, I could just go on, couldn't I? I don't need to. There's so much brokenness, and lots of you, I could look around the room and I know your stories. And I know some of the brokenness in your families and in your hearts. I know what some of you have experienced. And some days are dark, and some days are hard, just like they are for me. Claire and I chatted this week, and we were both crying, weren't we, Claire? Even the pastor. We all have those difficulties. We all struggle. And yet we're offered a promise of hope. So the question is, how do we wait? How do we hang on to that promise of hopefulness that King Jesus is coming, that he does return for us? What does that look like? I don't have a perfect answer for you. This isn't like a sermon that's going to end on it, and this is what you do. I think there's something about being in this space. I think there's something about reminding ourselves of the promise. There's a reason that we have all these old books. You know, the Old Testament, the Bible is thousands of years old. Not this particular one. It's thousands of years old. You know why? Because the nation of Israel worked really hard to remind themselves again and again and again and again of those promises. And they said we need to write them down, and we need to tell the story, and we need to remind each other, what has God said? And we need each other to remind each other, don't we? It's why we sing these songs. You know, I asked Johnny if we could sing a song, because there's a song, you know, we talk about verse 2, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. And as I was preparing this, the song comes into my mind, light of the world, you step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see. Beauty that made a heart adore you. Here I am to worship. We come into this space and we sing these songs, and the songs are not just songs. If they're good worship songs, we're singing scripture. We're singing the promises of God. What Johnny does up here, he doesn't think so, but he's not just playing music, he's preaching. He's singing to us the scripture. And you probably remember the songs that Johnny sings for us way more than you remember anything that I'm going to say to you. Put it to a song and we remember it. So we sing the promises of God. So when we're in despair, and when we start to think, God, are you ever coming back? Are you ever going to keep your promise? Are you ever going to restore my family? Are you ever going to restore my family? Are you ever going to heal the people that I love? When are these wars going to end? When will children stop dying? God, when are you going to do that? In those moments, we remind ourselves of the promises of God. On my hard days, you'll find me driving down the road, not on an icy one, but you'll find me driving down the road. And if you look in the window, you'll see that I've probably got some music up very loud. I don't want to hear myself singing my heart out. And I'm not singing Jingle Bells. I am reminding myself of the promises of God, and I put on the worship, or I call up a friend and say, can we get together? Can we just talk a bit so we can remind each other that God is still good, that Jesus is still on the throne, and he keeps his promises. And so when we celebrate Christmas, December 25th, every time you give someone a gift, I kind of want to just like mess with your head a bit. Every time you give someone a gift, I want you to think about the fact that the only reason we give anyone a gift or have any joy is because God gave Jesus to us as a gift. And it is a reminder to me if God gave me Jesus as a gift and fulfilled the first promise, then I know he will keep the second promise. If he came as a baby and died on a cross, you better believe he's coming back as a king, riding that horse, fire in his eyes, saying no more. You better believe it. So every time you give someone a gift this Christmas, you are giving that gift as an act of faith. Yeah? They don't know that maybe, but we know. Every gift you give, you're reminding yourself, Jesus is coming again. Jesus is coming again. This too shall pass. This isn't forever. This isn't the end of the story. Every gift. I spent like 2 hours. I hate wrapping gifts. I spent like 2 hours last night wrapping gifts for my friends and my parents and nieces and all sorts of people, right? And every gift, I was thinking about this last night, every gift is a reminder, not just that Jesus gave me a gift, but every time I give it, I'm saying, I can give you this gift because I know Jesus is coming. I know Jesus is coming. I know Jesus is coming. I just want you, literally, I just want you, every time you hand someone a gift, in the back of your mind, I want you to hear my voice. A little American lady, I know Jesus is coming. That's the promise we have. That is what we are waiting for at Advent. We're not waiting for baby Jesus. He's coming on. We have the responsibility now to believe him, to trust him, to tell others about him, to help other people like C.S. Lewis helped us to understand that Jesus is everything that he said that he is. What we're waiting for is King Jesus to return. And we seek to fill ourselves with hope and reminders while we wait, and to recognize that the days are few, and so we want to tell as many people, I want my whole family in heaven with me. I want all of my friends there. I want everyone to celebrate in God's kingdom, that kingdom where there's no war, where there's no disease, where there's peace and justice and righteousness. So while I'm waiting, I'm going to make good use of the time.